Hello, and welcome to the third global webinar on public health. This presentation is entitled Global Suicide Trends in 2022. My name is Professor Lockhart. I have 18 years of experience in mental health and addictions counseling across multiple settings. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, master addiction counselor, current board member for the Alaska chapter of NADAC. I'm a professor of counseling at Yorkville University in Canada and affiliate faculty with the Colorado School for Family Therapy in the United States. I'm also part of the selection committee for this webinar. I will begin by recounting worldwide statistics of suicide deaths as a way to convey the importance of this issue. According to the World Health Organization, 15 per 100,000 males and 8 per 100,000 females are at risk for suicide and suicide death. In absolute numbers, this translates to more than 800,000 deaths from suicide every year, and this figure is likely underestimated. Its causes are complex and multifaceted, including underlying mental health conditions, stressful life events, personality factors, and coping styles. It can occur at any point in the lifespan after early childhood. Numerous recent articles have focused on economic factors, in particular the global financial crisis, and their impacts on suicide rates. A study of 63 countries estimated in excess of nearly 5,000 suicide deaths worldwide were related to global financial crises, with the effect of unemployment on suicide rates being stronger in countries with lower pre-crisis unemployment rates. An increase in unemployment levels from 3 to 6% were associated with 6.1% rise in suicide rates. The degree of which unemployment itself contributes to suicide death versus other related factors such as housing loss during the financial crisis is unknown due to their intrinsic link. Suicide deaths related to eviction and foreclosure routinely rises during financial crises worldwide. In Greece and other European countries, governmental austerity measures were associated with increasing suicide rates. Males in manual labor professions are more greatly impacted by suicide. Countries with low financial protection for the unemployed are impacted by higher rates of suicide deaths. Overall, there is a positive relationship between poverty, unemployment, and suicide. Several studies investigated the effects of earthquakes on suicide rates and found in 3-month period following a major earthquake, there's a rise in suicide deaths. The 2011 earthquake in Japan contributed to an increase of 23%. The 2015 Nepal earthquake contributed to an increase of 41%, while the 2020 earthquakes, 2 of them, in the Philippines contributed to 21% of suicide deaths related to natural disasters. Please note, there is no routine gathering of this data, which makes it difficult to delineate between factors caused by the natural disaster or which factors are more contributory to suicide deaths. Is it homelessness, the death of loved ones, unemployment, or some other factor left in the wake of a natural disaster? More consistent research is needed in this area. Several cross-sectional studies found a dose-response relationship between parental psychopathology and suicide behaviors of their offspring. Both generalized anxiety disorder and panic disorder in parents were associated with at least one suicide attempt by their offspring. A large cohort study in Sweden found positive association between suicide attempts in both sexes of offspring whose parents separated or divorced in their childhood. Another cohort study found that a death of a parent before a child reached 6 years of age influences risk of suicide, twofold if the parent's death was by suicide, and threefold if a boy lost his mother. I would be remiss not to mention COVID-19, the global pandemic. COVID-19 pandemic is having profound mental health consequences for many people. A study published just last year, 2021, investigated 21 countries with more than 3 million population sample. The research team used interrupted time series analysis to model monthly suicide rates from January 2019 to the end of March 2020, with a comparison the observed amount of suicides in the early months of the global pandemic from April 1st to the end of July 2020. Their findings revealed for high income and upper middle income countries, suicide numbers remain unchanged in the early months of the pandemic compared with pre-pandemic estimated levels. There was a decrease in suicide rates in 9 countries, with a position that government support via housing, employment, and healthcare are positive contributors. And in the upper right of this slide, you will see the 9 countries in which there was a decrease in suicide during the early months of the pandemic. When we look at the relationship between war and suicide, during times of war, suicide deaths decrease. It is postulated that greater social integration, increased patriotism, a greater sense of purpose, and so forth, resulting from a state of war is actually a protective factor against suicide. However, after wartime, war veterans are at a higher risk of suicide due to stressful exposures during combat, wounds and injuries, brain trauma, pain syndrome, and while they attempt to reintegrate into society. Suicide by age. Globally, suicide rates are the highest in people aged 70 years and older, with preteens aged 5 to 14 at the lowest rates. Suicide by gender or sex. Globally, in 2019, the suicide rate amongst males was 3.7 times higher than amongst females. The transgender population globally has wide and varied rates of suicidal ideations, suicide attempts, and suicide deaths, with SI and SA ranging from 37% upwards to 83%, and suicide deaths between 9.8 and 44%. The range of the data hinges on governmental human rights policies, with countries that criminalize transgenderism and discriminate contributing to the higher end range of suicidal ideation, suicide attempts, and suicide deaths. Suicide by countries. These are the countries with the highest suicide rates that range from 72.4 per 100,000 people to 28.2 per 100,000 people. Here are another set of the highest suicide rates, which cluster around the 25 per 100,000 people. Here are the countries with the lowest suicide rates, as low as 0 males. And as you can see, to the top left, this is the only country where male or females outnumber male deaths statistically. These are the 6 populous countries with varying suicide rates. On the one hand, China and Indonesia have low suicide rates with populations of nearly 1.5 billion and 280 million, respectively. On the other hand, Russia, the US, Japan, and India have higher suicide rates with 2022 population estimates for Russia reaching 150 million, for the US reaching 335 million, for Japan over 125 million, and lastly, India with over 1.4 billion. Here is my contact information if you're interested in collaborating. A list of references are available upon request. I thank you for your time and your attention.